Okay, thank you for your patience. The drill is over. I'm sorry we had very little connectivity in the parking lot, as you can imagine. All right, we'll be back up and running in no time and try to get through as much of it as possible. Okay, and I am back. Thank you again for your patience in for this fire drill. All right. So thank you again. So I'm going to skip through these slides. As I was saying to you earlier, that for this assessment, we are looking at the interpreting and constructing text section um, for third and fifth grade. And with this assessment for these two grades, students will be asked to construct a text for a specific purpose and audience. And so that's one of the things that you are working on in your classes. You will continue to have them practice that skill so that they are very comfortable, they become very comfortable with that. As far as the audio visual components are concerned, the students are, go back to this. So with audio and video texts, we know that in this section, that this text section will include, test section will include either an audio or a video clip. The audio and video clip will not appear in section 2 or section 3, and this is for all grades. The audio and video clip will be short, so it's 1 to 3 minutes, and it will include closed captioning. So this is very important that you note. Please note this. It will provide the captions for all students, and it will appear automatically. So students can then select the CC closed captioning button to turn the caption off. So it is in your best interest as the student's teacher to ensure that your students know where the closed captioning button is. If it is uncomfortable for them, if it's distracting to them, they should know where to go to turn it off. Right, so that is something that they'll have to become familiar with. And again, if you're using headphones, you want to ensure that those are sanitized if you are using headphones for multiple students. In terms of the tools, the video and audio tools that they have at their availability, students are going to need to become familiar with this. And if you had heard from your other colleagues, and if you were here as a coach and you were here on Tuesday, you know what I'm going to say. Students need to get onto that website and practice. So you want your students to become very familiar with the framework of this assessment. And if you know where they should go to practice, I want you to drop that in the chat. So go ahead and drop in the chat where your students are going to be able to go to practice using the assessments, looking at using the tools rather for the assessment. So if you know where they go, drop that in the chat. And I want to see who knows it. Thank you, Miss Jennings from Rock Chapel. They are going to go to the Georgia Experience website online, and I will drop that link for you in the chat so that you know where to go. So you're going to have them go through this process, toggle through, practice with the play, the pause, the move, All of these buttons, have them click on it, practice it every single day, to ensure that they are familiar, they become familiar with those tools. So we also have those universal tools for questions and or texts, and these are the tools that they have at their disposal. I am very big on teaching students what they need to know. I'm not going to take anything for granted. So we have the tools. We are going to ensure that students are familiar with the tools, and you explain what those tools are to them. You can't go wrong if you teach it to them, right? So go ahead and teach them the tools so they become familiar with them. Again, here are further more tools. I won't get into that because of the time that we lost due to that fire drill. But if you're going through those tools with your students every single day until they become familiar to them. All right. So when we look at the first task, I want you to take a look at this scenario. Look at the research question and the three sources. So this is the ICT set on honeybees, and this is for 5th grade. So I want you to take a look at the different components. How many different sources are they using? How many different sources are they using? So this is my way to engage you. You go ahead and drop it in the chat. Thank you very much, Ms. Jennings, again. Thank you. So they're using 3 different sources. When we think about that, so source 1 it's an article about honeybees from a science magazine, and it's called The Buzz and Honeybees. Source 2 is a pamphlet, and source 3 is, what is it that they're doing? Yes, they are listening. So in this case, it's talking about listening. So it's 3 sources. So the scenario, why should we protect honeybees, is the question. Now, when you take note of that, in this case, do you see the symbol? It's a headphone. You can teach your students that as well. Now, as we move into the actual activity, remember we said that they're going to have 2 types of questions, right? In this assessment, if you remember what those question types are, SR and TE, right? So this is which one is this? I want to make sure you're with me. Selected response. Is it selected response? So these are, if you look at it, which 2 questions are best answered by the information in source 1? And so these are your MCQs. Okay, so they're giving you the option, the students have the option to read and then to interpret the text aligned. So 4 items are aligned to interpreting texts, and they have multiple ways of answering those questions. So they're going to select one box in each now to show whether each statement describes the information that's present and which source it's coming from. All right. So you look at that one and see how they have designed it so that your students become familiar with how it is structured. Again, when we look at this writing task includes the research question, purpose, audience, and be sure to statement. So they need a be sure to statement. So with that writing task, we're going to create a text in the box below. Refer to the writer's checklist as you write and edit your text. Now, again, the students need to know where that writer's checklist is. But also, more importantly, you have to practice with them using that writer's checklist. And if you haven't already started doing that, the moment you return, I know you're still wrapping up assessments, map assessments, and so on now. You need to start having them use that writer's checklist with everything that they write. Okay, and we're going to dive into why in a little bit. But that writing task is presented. They're going to pull that writer's checklist down because that's how they're going to guide and decide if they're answering the question as they should be. With the writing rubric, this is the structure. So it's a single integrated rubric for each grade level and course. So we have been talking about integration since the new standards came out. They keep doing that into the assessment. So when we talk about integration, they blend everything. Nothing is siloed. When you're teaching, You also have to integrate because that's what they're going to see on the assessment. They're checking on 3 traits: purpose and organization, that's valued at 3 points, evidence and elaboration, another 3 points. And then the third trait, language usage and conventions, that's 2 points. And so as you are grading your students' work, you want to make sure you're looking at that. So let's look at purpose and organization and the overall trait description. What do you notice? Do you notice that it says grade 3 and 5, and then it tells you the trait description? This is the same way that it is written in your standards. So we see that band, we see the expectation for the 3rd through 5th grade, right? So what is it that students should be able to do for each grade? But we see the trait description written out in our standards. So they should be able to examine the writer's ability to construct a coherent, purposeful text. Again, it tells you, right? Purposeful text with a cohesive and effective organizational structure. So that's your purpose, that's your organization. Again, it has further details, which you're familiar with, but I want you to know what's there. It tells you what the expectation is for 3 to 5. Now, when we look at the rubric descriptors, if you look at this, take a few seconds to look at the organization, right? So organizationally, what does it look like? What does this look like when you look at it organizationally? Does it remind you of what you see daily? If you're going into Georgia Inspire, right? And you're looking at your standards as you're planning, does it not look the same way? Yes, it does. And so your rubric is pulled from what you interact with every single day. So if you're teaching what's there, then you're on the right track and you have nothing to worry about. I want you to look at some of the expectations for 5th grade, but I'm going to ask you to do a comparative analysis, just a quick comparative analysis. Because 3rd grade, when we had this conversation, I could say to them, okay, just look at 3rd grade. But remember, because the expectation is what they should have arrived at by 5th grade, if something is missing, right, from their writing in 3rd grade, and they don't have it for 5th grade, you tell me yes or no in the chat. Is that going to impact the end result for your students? So if something is missing, if there's a gap from one of these criteria listed here, do you think your students' 5th grade writing task is going to be affected? Yes or no? Just drop it in the chat. Y for yes, N for no. Good. Now, thank you for that. Thank you for that. So yes, so I noticed that it says I need to develop a cohesive and effective organizational structure by grouping my ideas. So for my 3rd grade, look at those words in pink. The sentences needs in 3rd grade, they need to have related sentences. They need to link ideas and information, right? If we go over to 5th grade, it still talks about ideas, correct? But it says the organizational structure must be cohesive and effective. And then it says connects reasons to a stated opinion. So 3rd grade, it says link ideas and information. 5th grade, it says we're connecting the reasons to a stated opinion. And so it just takes what they had in 3rd grade and it kicks it up a notch. So when you are teaching your writing, if your students are giving you just basic stuff, it's basic. They're giving you the related sentences, but the ideas are not strong. Talk about that with them, okay? Ensure that they're giving you that higher level, the rigor is built in, and you don't accept 3rd grade writing when you're expecting them to complete that 5th grade expectation. So pay attention to those keywords so you're ensuring that the rigor is built into that 5th grade standard. With the resources that you've been provided with, connecting the resources. So we talked about the checklist. So now we're going to get into where that checklist shows up in the rubric. The checklist, and I know you can't see it because it's fine. That's not the point. What I want you to look at are the arrows. Every single checklist item.
Who's working? I told her to tell them
Somebody is not muted. Let's see. I'm gonna fix this. Please mute your mic.
couple weeks ago, Ramsey told me to sign up for it, and I said,
Okay, I just needed to fix that. All right, so right now you won't be able to unmute yourselves. But you'll still be able to react. So you'll be able to still drop things in the chat and give me a thumbs up. All right. As I was saying, every single checklist item is linked to a task on a rubric descriptor. So if your students complete every single checklist, and every time they do something in the assessment and they check it off, and you're practicing this in your classroom, every time they do something and they're able to check it off, you're satisfying the requirement, the expectation of the rubric. So you can still do that comparison with your students in the classroom so they understand the why of the checklist and they understand where the descriptors are coming from. But more so for you, as you are grading their work, you want to ensure that you're looking at that checklist and you're comparing it to yourself and you're becoming very familiar with both. Okay? So the wonderful thing is in an exam, the assessors understand that this is writing on demand, right? So on demand writing in response to a text, it is going to be what it is in an assessment. So students are going to write and it's going to be limited by the time that they have to work on it. And so they're given the benefit of that. They're given that consideration. And so it is different than when you are writing in class. So because of this, they consider the students' responses and they are viewed as timed first drafts and are not expected to be final polished paper. So they're not a college thesis. They are not a 2-week writing task that you would have worked on with them in your classes and you would have corrected and revised. And so there are allowances for that. And so the scoring process rewards the students for what they do well, which is why you have a rubric. And that is also why it's holistically graded. And so let's talk about that some more. So the scoring approach for these ICT writing tasks is holistic by trait. And so we know about traits from the standard. And so it means that the reader should find the best fit, right, for that bulleted criteria. So if a student does very well and you would have given them a 3 in one area and a 1 in one area, what is it overall that I need to be looking at? And how is the student performing based on that overall grade, based on the overall expectation? So many times their responses will have characteristics, right, of different score points. And so you, the scorer, will need to use your judgment to ensure that the student satisfies that holistic component based on the expectation. So there are instances when their responses you're not able to score them. And some of these are listed here. So if the student does not respond, there's no score. If it's copied, so we know sometimes students are unable to write, and so they copy. I'm not sure what's happening with Teams. It's not behaving. Okay, so please ensure your microphone remains muted. Thank you. Also, there is limited information. So they're not able to, the student's response is not sufficient. So it's not long enough to be able to formulate a response. It doesn't satisfy much of anything at all, if anything at all. From the rubric, it is also unscorable, or they're not able to score it. So it's non-scorable. A few others include if they write in a different language, if it's off topic, if it's offensive, and if it is illegible. I want to highlight this point. Many times our students write, and especially if they're writing by hand, I know most times it's written on the computer, but students need to be aware that they do not write for themselves. Nobody writes for themselves unless you journal, right? And you want to express your thoughts, but that's not where the space is. Most people do not write for themselves. You write for others. And because you're writing for others, you have to write so that others can understand what you're saying and what you're expressing or articulating. And so it's important for you to stress that to your students. When we think of the writer's checklist, It is to assist students in the writing process. So a writer's checklist is available. We discussed that at length just now. And it includes all the criteria from the writing rubric, and it is written in student-friendly language. And so we are practicing that. Students are becoming very familiar with that. The criteria reflection. So what does an introduction look like, and what are the characteristics of a strong introduction? So they've started the work, and they're going into practicing, and they're going to do that work right now for the assessment. Again, I'm going to keep stressing the practice component, practicing, because that's when it's going to become a routine, and when they get into the assessment, it's not foreign and they don't panic. And so we want to ensure that they satisfy this list right here. So for every introduction that they write in class, grade it based on the items listed here, the bulleted points here. So this is what a strong introduction include. As a matter of fact, I just had an idea. Why not print this big? Make a poster of it. Have it in your class. I really just thought of that, right? With this nice lady standing there. And then you say, okay, did you satisfy all of the criteria, right?
Mm-hmm.
You tell
Mm-hmm.
me, and let the
Yeah.
students be the judge of their own work, right? And so this is a great way for you to continue to reinforce the expectation for the assessment. Again, somebody has unmuted their microphone. Please be mindful of that. Thank you. All right, so with an introduction, let's look at what a 3 looks like. Take a look at this slide. I want you to read the sample, and then I want you to look at the score. A few seconds. All right, so in the interest of time, you'll recognize that A, for me, it's not very long. But with an introduction, it satisfies, it has a hook. It captivates the audience, it engages you, it holds you in place, and it introduces the reasons, right? And so it does satisfy the components or the criteria of the introduction without getting into too much extra stuff, right? So they got straight to it. In terms of the organizational structure, so what does it look like when a piece is cohesive and it has effective organization throughout? And so what does it look like? These are the components. So it must be logical. It organizes by reasons. It stays on topic, includes details, and so on. And so let's look at a sample of that. And this is, I know you can't see it very well, but organizationally, let's look at the first 2 words in each paragraph. We know, right? So it addresses the audience. I can say that to you together. It's cohesive, and and the ideas are grouped together in a cohesive paragraph. And you see those transitional words that we tend to teach our students, right? So that helps with organization using those transition words. So we talk here too about, and I jumped ahead of myself with the transitions and connections. How can students use those transitions effectively? So we just saw some of those transition sentence starters, and then let's look at an example of that criteria. So use transitions within and across paragraphs. So I know we tend to spend a lot of time with those transitions between paragraphs, but I want you to also look at this. And I thought of this on Tuesday when I did that previous training, that we really should be focusing on those in between transitions to make those connections, right? So if I say this, then what? And if you're paying attention to this, it does help with the flow of the writing. Okay, so in terms of our conclusion, this is what a strong conclusion has. It's a summary. It includes a call to action, right? So what is it going to look like when we say this? So let's take a look at that real quickly because we don't have a lot of time left. So honeybees should be protected because they produce honey that helps humans and the environment. Short, it's sweet, it's spicy, it gets to the point, it has a call to action. And then the student has the reason. So here I have made my call to action. This is why I said that. And so it finalizes a response in a very succinct manner and captures what they discussed in their writing. So when we look at fifth grades, trait 2, and again, please bear with me. I know that you've had a long day. I did not anticipate a fire drill, but I thank you for staying on. This is important work. And so I'm really hoping that you can remain. And if you need to transition, um, that's okay, but I'm hoping that you will stick around. We don't have many slides left. All right, so thank you for that. I just want to acknowledge and appreciate you for remaining on the call. The Y is our student, so thank you for that. So going to our trait 2, evidence and elaboration. The traits examine, so this trait examines the writer's ability to explore sources and use well-chosen evidence from those sources to support an opinion and a topic. And of course, we know that the source is provided, right? So the writer effectively applies opinion and expository techniques. This is critical. I know this is new to us this year, but we must stress and emphasize that these techniques, we have to spend time on that. And like I said, I know it's new, it's different, it's a different way of writing, but we have to ensure that we're students are fully aware of what that looks like. And so across some 3-5 band, we look at what the expectation is for that grade level, the progression. We look at the descriptor, what that is, and the expectations. Let's look at some samples and what that looks like on the rubric first. So on our rubric, again, it is aligned and you can see one. So the second bullet down or third bullet down to the middle, and you will see that it's aligned to the expectation for trait 2. So when we're looking at that again, I'm not afraid to share with my student what the expectation is. I really would chunk it though, so I'm not giving this to them all at once, right? So whereas you're working on all of those 3 traits throughout your unit, I might focus on the first one and have them get that down and hone those skills really well for trait 1. And then I'm going to go spend a couple weeks on trait 1 where I'm focusing, giving them feedback, having them learn the checklist really well. And then I might transition over to trait 2. But that's your students, and that's where you have that autonomy to determine which one are you going to focus on. Some students might be able to focus on 2 before some are able to move over, right? And so that's the level of flexibility, but I want you to be intentional in ensuring that the students, and these are 5th graders, so the lift is heavier and the rigor has to be there as well. So with our criteria reflection, these are our reasons. So reasons effectively support. So again, this is evidence, right? So what are the characteristics of reasons that effectively support the opinion? Your opinion isn't baseless. They've provided you with the sources. And therefore, if the students are not quoting the sources, they're not getting those points. And so we are going to make that connection and help them make that connection. So we need to protect honeybees. That's your opinion. Then you must provide why you say that. And so the responses they must have 3 reasons that effectively support the opinion on why we should protect honeybees. And they receive that in the resources, correct? Remember those 3 different sources that we looked at? That's where they're going to provide their quotes from. They're going to get their quotation or their evidence. So what does it mean to integrate evidence? So now I found it. What does it look like when I put it on paper? So we're going to apply background knowledge that flows with what is already stated. So it's supporting what I said. It supports the reason, and you're using quotes or paraphrases. So again, we see that there is continuous integration, because if I'm going to use a quotation, it means that I must understand the convention for doing that. So none of this is isolated. None of this is in a silo. And it must be curated from multiple sources. Okay? Elaboration. So what does it look like? So we integrate well-chosen evidence. So what does it look like when we do that, right? So we're going to expand on ideas. So we're going to add to the evidence. Again, it must be cohesive. So evidence and elaboration. So this is our sample. Honeybees have important roles in the world and should be protected. That's my opinion. The provided reasons: honeybees pollinate flowers. That's evidential. That's scientific fact. We know this to be true. Where did I get this from though? Right? So adding to source one, they do this by getting, according, I said adding, sorry about that. Can't see. According to source one, they do this by getting coated in pollen. So I'm using source one. The students they're getting that evidence. The evidence score is a 3. The elaboration score is a 2. Remember when we talked about holistic grading? Here it is. So a student might get a score of 1 for evidence. Maybe they get a different score for for elaboration, but it's something that is holistic. But I'm looking at the relationship between what? The checklist and the traits. I'm going to look at the expectation I highlighted in the rubric, and I'm going to find the best number, right? The best descriptors that the students have shown me, and that's a grade they're going to get. That's a score I'm going to assign. Criteria reflection, crediting sources. How can students properly credit sources in their writing? Again, even at the university level, it's still hard, right? All these different styles. We're going to keep it simple for our 5th graders. Here is a sample. Like I said to you before, we're blending all of it. So here are 3 samples. There's the quotation mark here, the according to source here, and then they say in source 3 it states. And so those are options that your students have at their disposal. Again, I like to chunk things because I know that if I chunk it and I teach them, we're going to use quotations. And they've been using quotations since 2nd grade, right? End of 2nd grade. So it's something that they're exposed to, and they've been exposed to that. If your students are versed in it, great job. I'm going to move to the next one, right? And so I'm going to say to my students, I want you to use quotations because you know how to do that. And I also expect you to use according to, right? Or some version of that. And so they're practicing using both, not just one, because again, I want that routine to be built into their writing. So it's second nature, and it's something that they're using so that when they get into the assessment, it's not new news. It's something they've been doing for a while. Okay, guess what? We're finished. All right. I thank you. 3:05. We made great time. I wanted to be done at 2:50 so that I'd give you enough time to ask questions. And I did run through some things really quickly because of that fire drill. So I do want to open up the floor for you to be able to ask your questions and to please give us an opportunity to hear from you if you are not comfortable asking questions. If you do have questions, I think sometimes, a lot of times, others might have similar questions that they might, not want to ask in a group. So if you do have a question, drop it in the chat, or you can provide that feedback to us. There's a QR code. Ms. Dunn is going to receive that feedback, but she will disseminate it to the entire Horizon area team, ELA team. My name is Tirona Gussie, and I am the professional learning facilitator. I'll drop it in the chat for you because the spelling is different. I want to thank you all for joining me this afternoon and hanging around, even with a fire drill. Had not registered in Frontline, please do so. If you have joined with a group, I'm not going to see your name on the attendance list, and therefore I will not be able to mark you present for this training. So if you are joining with a group, please go ahead and put your name in the chat, or the person who is the one joining the call, but just go ahead and put those names in the chat. That will allow us to grade you so that you can get credit for attending this session. Thank you again. And remember, practice, practice, practice. I want to see, and I'm sure your ELA coordinators are going to be looking out for you using these tools, even when you're teaching my view. So every single time, if you're using RightScore, I understand that RightScore has its own rubric, but you're going to take your students to Georgia Connections and they need to know how to navigate that space. And you also need to be grading your students using the checklist. Now, I don't care what resource you're using, right? Use that checklist, use that rubric because it should be aligned and your coordinators are working super hard getting your modules together. Use the checklist to grade their work and have the students verify whether or not they agree with you, right? Based on the checklist, because when they're in the exam, they're not going to have you to tell them, oh, yes, you should check that off. Nope, that's not ready yet. They're going to have to do it on their own and practice grading them using the rubric as well. So that will inform you and give you data as to whether or not your students are, how well your students are doing in terms of the grade band that they're at. So if they're giving you third grade work and they're responding like a third grader, you're not going to get the points in Georgia Math Stones for that. Okay? So make sure the rigor is there and the level is also there. All right, it is now 3:08. I thank you for joining and thank you for dropping your names in the chat. I see many names, Indian Creek. We have several schools represented here today. Again, if you have any questions, please provide us with some feedback so that we can improve and we can work. We're here for you. And so we continue to work for our students and to support you in doing that good work. I appreciate you being here with me this afternoon. And I look forward to seeing you another time. I'll hang around here until 3:15. And if you have any questions, I think you should be able to unmute since it did not work the way I set it up. But please go ahead, unmute and ask your questions or drop them in the chat. But I'll be here. I'll turn my microphone off. I'll leave my camera on for you to join me or to stay around until then. And I'll hang up at 3:15. Thank you again for joining.
Good afternoon, Miss Gussie. This is Dr. Guthrie. How are you?
Hi, Dr. Guthrie. I know your voice from anywhere.
Good to see you. Thank you for the training today. It was awesome. I wanted to know, will y'all be sharing the PowerPoint with us or no?
Thank you for that question. There is another series that's going to be presented in January. And so I'm going to defer to your coordinator to provide you with that information. But I will tell you this training has been recorded. And so we're going to get that. I know I tried to share that today and it was not shareable. So we're going to put it in on YouTube and then we'll share that out with you. Okay, so you will get the recording if nothing else. And please also remember your coordinators are there to support you with this effort as well. And so I will defer to them in terms of you receiving the training, the slide deck, okay? But right now the slide deck is a comprehensive slide deck with both sections attached. And so I'm not sure in terms of the timeline when that would be available to you, but you will have the video recording.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And just so you're aware, for those of you who are on the call, the video recording usually posts inside of the chat within an hour of the meeting closing or ending or me ending the call. And so you can always check back. It is loaded inside Stream, so Microsoft Stream. And so if you don't have access to it from the chat, if you click on the link and if you go to Microsoft Stream, you have to ensure you're accessing it through DeKalb County School District. You will be able to open it inside Microsoft Stream. Okay, so it's one of those icons that's within the Microsoft Teams platform on the left-hand side of your screen. I hope that's helpful.
Hello, thank you. That was helpful. Are you able to give a little bit more information on the fourth grade expectations for writing?
We are definitely going to have a fourth grade session. And
Okay.
so we will give you some more details on the fourth grade. What I want you to take away from for the fourth grade, because the fourth grade is a peer review. Okay. What I do want you to bear in mind is the rubric and the checklist. So three things for you for fourth grade. Please pay attention to that rubric and that checklist. So pull that fourth grade checklist, pull that fourth grade rubric, take your students through the Georgia Connect. All right, so log into that platform, ensure your students are familiar with the content. Okay, and especially for you because a peer review is something that is very, very different. And so when we go through that practice, I want to make sure that you're aware. I know we said fourth and fifth grade today, but in terms of getting on Georgia Connect, looking at how the assessment is graded, I know the details are different, but the how is the same. And so it's still going to be holistic. You're still going to be, the students will still have access to that checklist that links to the rubric, and that is what they're going to be graded on. And so going through that Georgia Connects webpage, that's going to start that work in terms of getting them prepared. And we're going to try to make sure we have just fourth grade on as soon as possible in January so that we can do that peer review and look at what that actually looks like and will look like for your students. So thanks for asking that question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for that. Thank you for that question, Miss Lewis. Um, so I think at school level, I think that's a conversation to be had. So the question is, what will this look like in the classroom? Georgia online training for students. You are going to have that conversation with your PLC at school level. Okay, so that's going to look different for everybody based on how your block looks. And so, but it's something that you're going to have to start doing too. Parents do not. So again, as the teacher, because they're doing the assessment at school, right? Parents can take a look at the site. It's public, it's in the public domain, but getting your students prepared for the assessment requires you to take them through step by step by step in testing conditions. And that's one of the other things. And so when you're training them, you want to set the stage for in the test, we're not having sidebar conversations. This is going to be under testing conditions and this is what it's going to look like. But what I want you to do is to teach them. So you're going to pull up your ViewSonic, you're going to attach your computer. They close their lids, okay? They're not looking at their laptop screens when you're looking at your laptop screens for the first time because you want them to pay attention to every step that you take. And so you're doing that direct, explicit instruction for them, and you show them everything. Again, I am big on chunking because the brain focuses for very short periods of time, right? And that's even the focus time span is even shorter now than it was 10 years ago. And so I'm going to chunk it and I'm going to go through with them. And we talked about the closed captioning first, just giving them, just walking them through and having them look at the pages. And I know some very techie, fancy teacher is probably going to create a Canvas slide deck, right? And have the slide deck. And show them, okay, this is what, when you log in, so I'm going to put it, I like the live, right? So this, you click, this is what you do. This is what's next. And I'm going to show them the overview of what it looks like. But today, we're only going to look at the closed captioning. And we're only going to click this on and off. because we have the rest of our block to teach, right? And so again, it's a PLC decision, it's a school-based decision on when that training is going to happen, but it needs to be, and I love this word, integrated. It is going to be integrated into your block. I asked this question for you. I'm going to ask this question back, and not just to Miss Lewis. When you are teaching your students how to use iReady, iExcel, what other programs do we have? All the things on Clever, okay? When you're teaching them how to access those platforms, how to do their assessment, their benchmarks, how do you initially teach them to use those platforms? What process do you use to teach them? Right? And so we had Prodigy this year for the first time. So I know some of us might say, oh, but they learned that in first grade or kindergarten and so on. Prodigy was new. When you get a new online platform, how do you teach your students how to use that platform? Can anybody answer me that question? This is a very good question. Anybody?
I guess you go on there with them, kind of modeling. So you will open the platform and guide them through, giving them step-by-step instructions on where to find the platform, how to log on, where are the activities and what they need to focus on. Kind of walk them through the process.
Thank you very much, Ms. Singleton.
You're
Exactly.
welcome.
And you're doing the same thing for this. But this is higher stakes. Excellent. I love it. Thank you, Ms. Lewis. So it is the same, explicit, step by step, I do, we do, you do. And this is such high stakes because we really don't want, you saw how some of the introduction and the conclusion were short, right? We don't want our students to get tripped up because they didn't know how to turn off the closed captioning and they are distractible, or they couldn't find the checklist and they didn't know to check and they forgot a step that they already know how to write, but because they didn't triple check or fact check or double check their work because they couldn't find the tool, for that to be the reason they fail. I do understand that we have students who are not at that level. And therefore, it's even more important that they understand that if you don't write something, anything, a sentence, if it's not going to count. Okay. And I also, my colleagues were just in the room, and I would be remiss to not say it to fifth grade as I did to with third. Your students that qualify for assistive technology, right? Just making sure that whatever assistance they can get, your ESOL students or ELL students, please ensure that those are a place for them. And so those other tools, headphones, right? So those little things can make a huge difference. If a child gets thrown off, it's just some kids that with anxiety, they get thrown off and that's it. They're done for the day. And so I think just practicing all of this now. I don't believe in 2 weeks before we're just rushing to practice for GMAS is all year. If I'm doing everything that is expected of me, like I said, I pointed it out to you. The layout is the same thing. They're not asking you for different. They're asking you for what you're doing every day. So if you're doing it every day with your students, even the students who are not yet there, but you're doing it, they're going to get some of it. Okay. And so just it's not extra, it's the work, right? So Georgia Milestone is not asking you to be different. They're testing the students on what you're doing in classroom. The language is the same, everything is the same. So giving them a heads up by practicing using that website, even 5 minutes out of the block every day, having them print out the checklist, have it on their desk. Everybody has a checklist. Everybody has a laminator in their building. I'm printing out my checklist. I'm printing out my rubric. That's just me, and everybody has it. And you learn it, and you know it. You internalize it, right? So by April, they know it the way they know their names. One less thing to worry about. Love the questions. My third grade teachers did not ask those hard questions. Thank you, fifth grade. You brought the rigor. All right, so it's now 3:22. Thank you so very much. I appreciate you being here with me this afternoon. I'm going to let you go and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. You take care now. Bye.